Hello, this is Ruslan Belov, and this is the daily briefing from the Ukrainian front. Today we have a very interesting episode about what's happening on the battlefield, so make sure to watch until the end. And as usual, I want to sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. If you've watched my videos before but haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Your subscription helps the channel grow. Thanks to everyone who already subscribed. Well then, let's not waste time and get started. So today is September 1st, which means we are summing up the results of the past month. August turned out to be the most successful summer month in terms of territorial gains on the front. And actually, not just the summer, overall, August was the best month of this year in terms of Russian advances. Around 600 square kilometers came under Russian control. Let's go step by step. We'll start with the Sumy region. There were no big numbers here. In August, the Russian army advanced by 14.5 square kilometers. They captured one village in the Sumy region, Basalovka. In addition, they pushed 1 kilometers south of Vorochino and Yablonevka and almost finished pressing down on Yunakovka. The Ukrainian armed forces, for their part, counterattacked and over the month managed to advance 2 kilometers north of Andreevka. In total, they retook about 8 square kilometers during the month. The net result still remains with the Russian army. 14.5 square kilometers gained by Russia versus 8 by Ukraine. Overall, as I mentioned in the July summary, the Sumy region has become a third priority area. Russia pulled out almost 70% of its reserves from here and transferred them to more important sectors. So major advances here are not to be expected anymore. I'm pretty sure that in September, Russia will gain maybe 15-20 square kilometers here at most. The situation is a bit more dynamic in the Kharkiv region. There, about 25 square kilometers were taken under control in August. Firstly, there were small advances around Volchansk. See these red lines? That's the front line as of August wall. And this is where it is now. These small sections are the gains made over the month. Not much, yes, but keep in mind that the Volchansk sector is considered a dead sector. The fact that there's any movement at all is already a big success. There was also progress near Melovoy. Russian troops advanced 3 kilometers south from the border toward the village of Ambanoy. The Dvoreshnoye bridgehead stayed completely static throughout the month with no gains at all. But the most intense fighting, of course, unfolded near Kupiansk. First, Russian units entered the northern part of the city. Second, they broke through more than 5 kilometers and partially blockaded the city from the west. The Ukrainian position in Kupiansk is now very difficult since all supply routes are under Russian drone control. I don't think Kupiansk will fall in the next month, but by the end of the year it's quite possible. Further south, on the Borovoy sector, Russian forces captured the village of Zelyony Gai and expanded their control north of Borovaya Andreevka. As you can see on the map, Ukrainian troops also carried out minor counterattacks, but no significant success. They only advanced 1 kilometers near Lozovaya, and that's it. In total, in the Kharkiv region, Russian troops captured 2 villages and 25.7 square kilometers in August. The Ukrainians, by comparison, gained 1.5 square kilometers. Now let's move on to the most important part, Donetsk region. I'll say this. In August, Russian troops captured more in Donetsk region alone than across the entire front in July. Before Donetsk, let's briefly look at Luhansk. There's not much to discuss. Progress happened in only one sector, where about 12.5 square kilometers were taken. That's all for Luhansk. Now Donetsk. The numbers here are big, and there are many sectors, so let's go one by one. Starting with the Lyman sector. Here, Russian troops advanced 5 kilometers along the Nitrius River, reaching Shandrigolovoye. They also advanced 2.5 kilometers south of Zelenaya Dolina, captured the village of Kolodezi, and began storming the large settlement of Zareknoye, which once taken would allow an approach to Lyman from the east. Altogether, Russian forces captured just over 30 square kilometers in this Lyman sector during August. Their neighbors on the left bank of the Zherebets River did even better. Over the month, they pushed nearly 9 kilometers south, finally resolving the situation with Torskoy, which came fully under Russian control. But the main achievement here was major progress in the Serebryansky forest. In fact, not all of the gains were reflected on maps, because the total advance in these woods was larger. Even American cartographers marked this Russian progress. In total, on the left bank, Russian troops captured 57 square kilometers in August. On the Seversk direction, there was also progress. They captured the village of Serebryanka, approached very close to Seversk from the pond side, and expanded control south of Verkhnekamenskoye, also capturing Novoselovka. At the same time, they lost one settlement, Vyemka, recaptured by Ukrainian troops. But in terms of numbers, this loss doesn't compare. In total, on the Seversk axis, Russia gained 18 square kilometers, while Ukraine took 4. Next is Chasov Yar. Here, as usual, there are no big numbers. Russian forces pushed the Ukrainians slightly back from the city to the north, east, and south. But every 100 meters here is taken with enormous difficulty. So in August, progress was only about 1.5 kilometers. The situation is more optimistic near Konstantinovka. Russian troops advanced well on the northeastern approaches to the city. They overran Ukrainian defenses in Predtechino, capturing the village. They also broke through another fortified area, Alexandro Shultino. From the canal they began pushing Ukrainian troops further back. But the key achievement was closing the pocket from the south and breaking through the last defensive line at Katerinovka and Klebanbek. In addition, they captured the settlement of Sherbinovka. As you can see, the front line moved by more than 10 kilometers over the month. Altogether, on this Konstantinovka sector, Russian troops gained 85 square kilometers in August. Now the eastern flank of Mirnograd. Here, 2 villages were taken, Poltavka and Rusin Yar. The advance to the north was 5 to 6 kilometers. An important event was also the capture of the spoil tip and the mine north of Mirnograd. But undoubtedly, the most important event of the month was the Dobropoliye breakthrough. To give you perspective, on August 1st, Russian positions were south of Fedorovka, and now they are 24 kilometers further north. Yes, at the peak the advance was larger, about 200 square kilometers, and not all gains could be held, but the result is still the most significant event on the front in August. The front line changed more here than at any time since spring 2022. 8 villages and 117 square kilometers were taken. Most of this was held, and now it's clear Ukraine won't be able to reverse it. They failed to eliminate the breakthrough, and they won't be able to. Russian forces are now consolidating the base of the breakthrough around Sharkovo and trying to advance further. On the Pokrovsk sector, there weren't many changes. Russian troops captured the village of Pervo-Maya, made slight progress in the city itself, and took control of the settlement of Udakhnoye on the western flank, along with the surrounding territory. In southern Donetsk, the Vostok grouping continues to perform well. Virtually the entire southern part of Donetsk region is under their control now. The last villages, Iskra, Alexandrovgrad, and Kamyshevaka, were taken. Ukrainian forces attempted counterattacks, advancing slightly in the fields and strongpoints, but failed to dislodge Russian troops from any settlements. Summing up Donetsk region, in August, Russian troops captured 22 villages and 2 settlements of urban type. In terms of area, that's 495 square kilometers. Just so you understand, in Donetsk alone, Russia gained more in August than across the whole front in June or July. A very strong result, largely thanks to the Dobropoliye breakthrough. And do you know who's second place in gains after Donetsk? Surprisingly, it's Dnepropetrovsk region. Here too, the Vostok grouping advanced, reaching Filia and Yanvarskoye, and capturing Novogeorgievka and Zaporozhskoye. The total area gained in Dnepropetrovsk during August was 31.1 square kilometers, more than in Kharkiv, Zaporizhzhia, Luhansk, or Sumy. Finally, Zaporizhzhia, the last region. There weren't many changes here in August. Russian troops captured the village of Plavny, entered Primorskoye, and are attempting to push into Stepnogorsk, but without success so far. That's all for Zaporizhzhia. If we sum up the overall situation at the front, in August, the Russian army took control of 30 settlements. Among them, 28 villages and 2 urban-type settlements. In terms of territory, during August, our army secured 587 square kilometers. As I said at the very beginning, this is the best result in 2025. Well, that's it for the frontline situation today. Now let's look at what's happening on the political stage. The Russian armed forces continue step by step to take out infrastructure, causing enormous damage that is not customary to discuss openly on Ukrainian TV channels. Our source reports that Witkoff warned Yermak that strikes on Russian oil refineries ordered by the globalists will have consequences for Zelensky and Yermak. For Trump, rising oil prices are unprofitable right now. The office should choose its side in the game, reports the Telegram channel Legitimny. Most of our sources are confident that the globalists realized sanctions cannot scare Russia and began striking Russian refineries en masse through the Ukrainian armed forces. Although Trump warned Zelensky not to do this yet, since rising prices would harm Donald, Zelensky once again chose the globalists' side. For this, Ukraine is now suffering record-breaking mass strikes on its infrastructure. Zelensky tried to spin another PR campaign on this, but it failed. Even Trump hinted that the strikes were retaliatory, because Zelensky attacked Russian refineries and provoked a response. The implication is that the office knew exactly what it was doing, but, as usual, hides behind the people. On Bankover Street, they are hoping that after the SCO summit, where a new large political bloc is being created that will rival the US, Washington will change its stance on the Ukrainian case. Meanwhile, Xi Jinping in China met with Indian Prime Minister Modi. This is Modi's first visit to China in 7 years, happening against the backdrop of worsening relations between both countries and the US. The meeting is extremely important. 7 years of clashes and border conflicts. And now, 2 countries with a combined population of 3 billion people sitting at the same table. In its attempts to impose a unipolar world order, the US has achieved very interesting results. In Hungary, the government will not lift its veto on opening negotiation clusters for Ukraine's accession to the EU, reports the Telegram channel Resident. Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó announced this in Copenhagen. At a press conference following an informal EU Foreign Affairs Council meeting, he said most EU countries are not interested in the success of peace negotiations. He added that Hungary is under heavy pressure to accelerate Ukraine's EU accession and impose new sanctions against Russia. But, as Szijjártó stressed, the Hungarian government will protect the country and its economy from this pressure and shield the Hungarian people from the negative consequences of the war. In his words, Budapest will not allow Ukraine to be pushed into the EU, because that would destroy Hungarian farmers, undermine Hungary's food security, and open the door for Ukrainian mafia groups into Hungary. That's why we will not allow the substantive part of negotiations to open, that is, the concrete sections of accession talks, Szijjártó declared. He also said Budapest will not support proposals for new sanctions, explaining the government's stance as a way to avoid higher utility costs for Hungarians. The SCO summit is Trump's nightmare. During the reception of summit guests, Vladimir Putin arranged additional bilateral meetings with various heads of state. Dmitry Peskov stated that the meeting between Putin and Pashinyan on the sidelines was long and productive. Putin also discussed issues with Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev and may also meet Aliyev at upcoming events. Armenia and China announced the establishment of a strategic partnership, according to Armenia's government press service. Putin has arrived at the SCO summit. Bloomberg reports that the largest political event in China is now underway. The Russian president came to Tianjin for the 2-day Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit, a bloc offering an alternative to the US-led world order. Rapidly unfolding global events give the summit even greater weight. Putin will be able to directly discuss with Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi the results of his meeting in Alaska with Donald Trump. On Sunday, Xi held bilateral talks with Modi, who was in China for the first time in 7 years. On Saturday, Xi had already met the leaders of Myanmar, Kazakhstan, Nepal, and the Maldives. After the summit, guests followed Xi to Beijing to attend a military parade marking the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, where North Korea's Kim Jong-un will also join. China will soon become the source of major shifts, as the US has officially designated it its main adversary in economic, military, and international affairs. That's why Washington has no intention of tolerating closer alignment among alternative power blocs. The European War Party wants to force Russia to end the special operation for economic and possibly military reasons. The German Chancellor said the Ukrainian conflict will end only if pressure on Moscow continues, so that it cannot carry on its operation. He phrased it vaguely, with accusations that the Kremlin maintains an aggressive stance in the peace process. Against this backdrop, Ursula von der Leyen visited the border fence with Belarus, calling Poland a frontline state facing hybrid attacks from Minsk and Moscow. She didn't clarify what exactly she meant, but the whole move was meant to reinforce the EU's resolve to keep supporting Kyiv. Still, the question of sending German troops to Ukraine was removed from the agenda. In the end, it turns out that even the strongest supporters of war are not ready to risk their soldiers, preferring to provide only financial aid. But for systemic financing, Kyiv needs to find a new donor. After the US cut off monetary support to Zelensky's regime, Europeans now need to find tens of billions of euros annually. Among the obvious but legally problematic options, confiscating Russian assets. But here too, many are opposed. For example, Belgium is against confiscating central bank assets. Even within the EU, many of Zelensky's demands are being rejected. The issue of frozen assets has again become central. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas stated Brussels will not return the seized billions even after the Ukrainian crisis ends. She insists Moscow must pay reparations to Kyiv. Recently, Zelensky named the transfer of stolen Russian money to Ukraine as one of the conditions for peace talks. Alexander Tushalev, editor-in-chief of Sovereign Economy, explained why the claims of the EU official and the Ukrainian leader are unlikely to come true. Zelensky admitted that Kyiv cannot regain territories within the 1991 borders on the battlefield. His compromises ended there, giving way to the usual refrain. Money, guarantees, pressure on Russia, including transferring the frozen central bank assets of the Russian Federation to rebuild Ukraine. In reality, both the NATO light proposals, the guarantees, and the demand for Russian billions all boil down to one thing: not leaving Ukraine alone with the economic crisis into which Zelensky and his European allies have been driving the country for years. But in Europe itself, there are fewer and fewer ready to actively support Kyiv. This club of interests cannot even agree among themselves. Kallas speaks of keeping Russian assets, while the foreign ministries of Belgium and Italy express doubts. The Belgians fear negative economic consequences since hundreds of billions of euros are stuck in Euroclear, based in Belgium. The Italians repeat the mantra about lack of a legal basis. Last time confiscation was rejected for these same risks. Instead, they resorted to using only the income from frozen assets. Now, as an alternative, some European leaders are floating riskier investment schemes, but judging by Belgium's position, enthusiasm for such proposals is very low.